الشيطان الرجيم أنت العفو فاعف عني أنت الغفور الرحيم اللهم إني أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم من كل شيطان رجيم أنت العفو فاعف عني أنت الغفور الرحيم صلى الله وسلم وبارك وأنعم على نبينا الكريم الأكرم صلى الله عليه وسلم صلى الله وسلم وبارك وأنعم على نبينا الكريم الأكرم صلى الله عليه وسلم صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم إني أسألك ربي باسمك العظيم تكفيني شر الحاسدين مولاي فرج عني همي أنت مجيب السائلين اللهم إني أسألك ربي باسمك العظيم تكفيني شر الحاسدين مولاي فرج عني همي أنت مجيب السائلين صلى الله وسلم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. Welcome everybody to our second half of our program, which is the family night portion of our program. Today we have our old friend and our resident. We have a East Coast representative out at Zaytuna, and that's Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. You know that us between the East Coast and the West Coast, there are some differences. We do things a little bit different. We have a different energy to us, but we have one of our own that's been out there on the West Coast, and he's been there for a long time. He's now the senior, really senior professor, one of the probably oldest tenured or the oldest professors at Zaytuna, and the longest tenured, I should say. That's the expression. The longest tenured professor, I think, at Zaytuna, which is Sheikh and Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. He's an old friend. Now, Sheikh Abdullah, are you able to turn your mic on, or did I turn your mic?
No, my mic is on, but I can't turn on my camera, so, but
okay, so let me see. Okay, now you should be able to unmute yourself, and you should be able to turn your camera. There you go. All right, alhamdulillah. Very good. So thank you very much, mashallah. I have a beautiful background there, and let's see if I could spotlight you here. The topic, we have a great topic today, and it is a topic of Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali's book, which is What It Means to Be Black and Muslim. Now, Sheikh Abdullah, is that the title of the book?
No, the title of the book is The Negro and Arab Muslim Consciousness.
Okay, so so that's the full title of the book.
Yeah.
And I guess the title that you gave us was the sort of similar title. But that's going to be still a reflection of your book.
Sort of bleeds into my book, of course. Good. Overlap. Related to it's more of a, I can say, sort of a historical book in certain ways. But I guess we start. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salam على أشرف الأنبياء والسيد المرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And alhamdulillah, once again, it's an honor to be able to take part in a program with Dr. Shadi, my good friend, Dr. Shadi Masri. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve you and also preserve your efforts and inshallah and increase them and also extend a great benefit to the ummah through all of your efforts. The title that we did give this particular talk was, I think it was, What Does It Mean to Be Black and Muslim? And originally, I think you had asked me to speak on something related to a particular Black personality in Islamic history. And in light of the fact that we are on the tail end of Black History Month, and for that particular reason, we wanted to have some type of discussion about that. And of course, connected to Islam in particular, because we don't only want to focus on the racial aspect of things, but we also want to focus on the religious aspects of things as well. And I suggested the other title, the title of what does it mean to be Black and Muslim? And of course, the title is it's more, I guess you would say, it's clickbait more than anything else, because many people will see the title and they'll automatically say, yeah, that's right, go tell those immigrants what they need to hear. You know, others may say, might be put off and think, okay, that's exactly what this is going to be about. However, you know, it's a way sort of to draw people in, as we know, and to actually talk about things that we think are things which will lead to very fruitful outcomes and exchanges, inshallah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so fundamentally, the issue here, I guess you would say, with the question of what does it mean to be Black and Muslim, is that what I try to do first and foremost is I'm trying to problematize, do what the postmodernists call problematize the whole idea of Blackness and race to begin with, because we know that in one sense we say Black, we're just talking about a color, and in another sense we are talking about Black as a term utilized to define a particular collective of people. Unfortunately, in our society, in American society, say in North America in particular, many people who would call themselves Black still imagine that throughout the world, and even perhaps going back into the distant past, that Blackness has been something static. You know, there's often there's what happens is the mistake of thinking that, for instance, when an African comes to North America, according to the US, it goes to Canada, that they have a similar sort of history and consciousness about the other, right? In particular, we're talking about whiteness, and you may feel the same way about someone who comes from the Caribbean, right? You know, but the Caribbean have their own sort of mindset. Africans from the African continent have their own mindset, and Blacks or Black Americans, sometimes we speak about them in that way, largely have a particular mindset as well. And so the question itself can and cannot be answered realistically by any individual, because no individual can represent an entire group of people, especially on the international stage. But it does suggest, when we talk about race, we talk about Blackness, a certain look or a certain thinking and a certain behavior that actually is supposed to line up with our ideas of Blackness. And of course, and I want to start off actually with, I wanted to read something that Brother Harun Sellers had posted on my page earlier today when I posted this announcement. And in the question of what does it mean to be Black and Muslim? And so he responded by saying this. He said, good question, Sheikh. Here's my answer in a quick freestyle. It means to have a soul wrapped in brown skin and a spiritual path to help it win, to be liberated from the trap of race, to focus one's time on seeking God's face, to be pleased with one's created form while making the brotherhood of man our social norm, right? And I thought that was so profound, and it really, I guess you say, summed up exactly my sentiments as well. And I felt it was important to deal with this topic, especially during the month of Black history as we come to the end of it, because if you observe many of the efforts of many people who would classify themselves as Black in the U.S. during this month, that in many cases you find that there is a somewhat of an embrace of the idea that Blackness is defined by perpetual and transhistorical victimhood, in the sense that we have moved nowhere, right, since the very beginning. There has not really been any progress. America still is what it was pre-1960s, or even going back to the slave period. But fundamentally, I would say that that was a false notion. And also the idea that if you don't believe those things, if you don't believe that you're an oppressed individual, if you don't believe that you are affected by what is called structural racism today, then you're not a real Black person, right? You have to acknowledge those things, you know. And the reality is that if we look at the intellectual exemplars among the Black population in America from the very beginning, meaning from the time of emancipation of the slaves in the U.S., that there's a different mindset that those intellectuals have than those who live today, many of those living today, because many of those living today are largely influenced by what we call critical race theory. And critical race theory, although they at times they may cite quotes, or they may sort of reference people like Malcolm X, or they may reference Martin Luther King, or others similar to that, but ultimately they miss the essence of these people, right? They still miss the essence of these people. And what has happened, unfortunately, is that not only for Blacks in general, but Black Muslims and Muslims beyond, who are actually not even Blacks themselves, have imbibed a particular philosophy that actually has led to a lot of, I guess, a lack of productivity, has contributed more to polarization in our society, rather than unifying the ummah and unifying people, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Sahaba themselves had done, or actually pursued, they tried to do. So for instance, what I mean by this is that the most popular Black person during the Civil War and after the Civil War was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, he was the most popular of men. And Frederick Douglass was, of course, an abolitionist, that he felt that slavery was immoral, and he fought for the emancipation of slaves, and he worked with President Lincoln, et cetera, et cetera. But he also believed in the ideal, the American ideal. He believed in the ideas about all men are created equal, and he believed that America could be redeemed if they had just simply done what was necessary to Blacks in order to make them completely liberated and not oppress them any further. So he believed in that. He didn't believe in going back to Africa. That was not what his idea was. And so in that sense, Frederick Douglass represents the one particular paradigm that still exists in the African-American community, and perhaps even to an extent a dominant paradigm which existed perhaps up until just maybe a few years ago, which was that integration was a good thing, that we should seek equality with whites, and we should see this as our home, and we are doing everything that we need to do to try to improve it. Then there's another paradigm that existed, and actually came out around the same time as well. One of Frederick Douglass's colleagues, a man known as Martin Delany, who actually was a physician, Harvard-trained physician. He was a black person who actually served under Lincoln as well in the military. And so Delany, his view was that, okay, we've gone through slavery, now we're free, and these people, they don't love us, they don't want us here, and we need to go back to Africa. And he was the one who coined the phrase of Africa for the Africans. And some people usually say that was Marcus Garvey, but that was actually Martin Delany who said that. So in other words, the point is just that there have always been more than one particular paradigm, so a sort of mindset among Blacks since the very beginning, but what's happened today because of many of the things that have happened over the past 4 years, especially, that we've seen sort of a sort of closing of certain borders, or sort of this solidification of the idea that there's only one type of Black person, especially at a time when Blacks could not be any more different than they have ever been historically in the United States of America. So, so for instance, let's say that there's one particular scholar known as Eugene Robinson, who he actually used to be an editor for the New York Times. He wrote a book called Disintegration. And fundamentally, what he highlights in this book is how integration actually led to the disintegration of Blacks in America. And he talked about how there was a time we can talk about there is a one united Black message or a front that everyone was working on, that we had Black leaders and everyone for the most part on the same page with regard to civil rights, et cetera, et cetera. But he said, but that has now been complicated because of the mixture of many different types of people. So for instance, he says that he divides Blacks into 4 different categories. He says that you have one group of Blacks he calls the mainstream. And the mainstream is what he called the middle-class Blacks. A lot of people don't realize this, is that the vast majority of Black people are not poor. The vast majority of Black people actually qualify as middle class. They're not the majority. They are, the poorest are not the majority. The middle class are the majority of Blacks. The second category that he terms the abandoned class is what the ones that we typically think about when we think Black. That class actually is a minority, and so it fluctuates between 20 and 25%. That this particular average of Blacks actually fall under the poverty class, the impoverished class. Now, of course, that's a high number. 25% is a lot, right? Or 20% is a lot, But at the same time, it still shows that the vast majority of Blacks are not classified as poor. And I do think that this is a fundamental problem that we find with non-Blacks who actually want to be sympathetic or empathetic towards the plight of Blacks in the US and around the world, I guess you would say. And that there seems to be an assumption that Blacks are not, they're all just simply poor. And so for instance, recently Biden was, when his town hall, he was talking about how a lot of the Blacks, they actually don't know how to utilize the reason why so many Blacks are not getting the vaccine is because so many of us we don't know how to utilize the internet. We don't know how to search for the places where we need to go to actually get a vaccine. And that in itself is a very racist thinking. There's nothing more racist than that, in my view, to think that way. And they used to say the same thing about the issue of voting, being disenfranchisement, being disenfranchised from the electoral process. They used to say about Blacks as well that, okay, well, they don't know how to locate we don't know how to locate the DMVs where we can go and get an ID. We don't have IDs, and we're just so stupid and we're just uneducated. We don't know how the world operates, and that itself, again, is the most racist type of thinking that I could sort of think of to conjure up, and this is a big problem. I think that we have to, as a community, we have to get rid of. We have to get rid of this mentality, this understanding. So Robinson says, so you have the mainstream, which are middle class, and then you have your abandoned class, which is a minority. And then we have what is called this transcendent class of Blacks. And so the transcendent class, or like the Oprahs, or like the Obamas, or the super rich, the rich people, the athletes, and others like that. These are the transcendent, the black population. Even though often they may utilize the Black card as a political ploy to get what they want, like a Van Jones, people like that. But these people are not members of the abandoned class anymore. They've transcended the even the middle class. You know, so you have this third category, and the fourth category he talks about is what he calls the emergent class. Now, the emergent class is a mixture of new immigrants from the African continent and those who are of mixed race, right? These, you know, so he said these four, because you have like these four groups of different types of blacks in the U.S., it's hard to talk about any realistic sense about an authentic black person anymore, right? You know, or when, even though you really couldn't talk about it in the past, but you really can't talk about it now because the situation has left the original groupings or original two groups of blacks into very fragmented, like, and as he calls is disintegrated in that particular fashion, right? So those are, of course, one of the leading ideas I wanted to begin with. And of course, if you want to speak about the book, I can speak about the book as well. And it looked like you're ready to speak about the book. What I say is about the book is this, and then I guess we can have a conversation, is that this particular book, The Negro in Arab Muslim Consciousness, was a work that which really was the culmination of my doctoral, my dissertation. And fundamentally, the issue was me trying to identify like what and where geographically the original Negro originated, right? In other words, what I found is that there are certain Muslim scholars, you know, historians like Ibn Khaldun or Mas'udi and other authors writing about these black people, right? And sometimes you probably have heard people say, okay, Ibn Khaldun is racist. He said this about black people, or those people said this about black people. You know, but what I found is that both in Arabic and English literature, you know, if you go, the further back you go, you'll find that there are these subtle distinctions to be made between those referred to as the Negro, as opposed to those who they refer to as Moors or Nubians or Ethiopians or Cushites, you know, the Cushites, et cetera, or even the Coptics, right? That you have these sort of gradations of black, you know, and it seemed that the Negro was at the bottom, right? But what led me to even want to look deeper into this issue was the very fact that some years ago, when I was still living in Philadelphia, there was a friend of mine who actually was a student. He used to come to my house and he used to study some works with me. And one particular day he had contacted me and asked me, do the Malikis actually say that black women, they do not need a wali in order to get married? And I said, no, I've never heard anything like that. You know, now, of course, you know, I have read things, you know, but it never really appeared to me that it was actually making a reference to a black woman, right? And like in Ibn Abi Zayd's, for instance, in Risala, he talks about the daniya, you know, that she can appoint whoever she wants to be among her guardians for marriage. And the daniya usually translates, you can say, is ignoble, the ignoble woman, right? You know, the lowly woman, the one she's undesirable, right? And you look into the commentaries and into the super commentaries of many of the Maliki scholars, and they will say they don't only talk about, say it's only the black woman, you know, but they actually are talking about other types of women as well. It's like, for instance, one they call the Musalmaniya, which is a you know, unattractive Persian woman, or you know, just Ajamiya. So they include other categories, but it seems that the black woman is singled out because of her color, but the others are not singled out because of their color. And I found that to be a bit fascinating, you know, that I come across this. But anyway, the student, he asked me this question, and I said, well, why you ask this question? He said, because there's an Arab brother who actually expressed interest in marrying an African-American sister. And she wants to marry him, but her father refuses to marry her to this man. And so the Arab man says to her, well, it doesn't matter. You don't need a wali anyway, because, you know, you're because of being a black woman. And he based this on what he understood from the Maliki school, and so of course that sort of antennas go up, and you want to really look deep into this and really try to get to the bottom of things. And so what I come to find in my studies was that fundamentally that the Black person, or in this case we call it the Negro, which translates as Zanj, or Zanj translates as Negro, and you find Hans Wehr translates it that way. H.G. Hava also translates it that way in his dictionary as well. The Zanj people of East Africa, in the area sort of Zanzibar, Tanzania, that they were referred to as Zanj, and it translates as Negro. Now, the thing that's interesting about the Negro is that the Negro, or at least the original Negro, was an individual who was depicted as a bare-naked cannibal, right? Who was we call a savage. And for instance, there's an author of an ancient history known as Hudud al-Alam, the limits of the world, which was written close to the time of al-Mas'udi. And in this particular work, he talks about three different groups of Blacks. He talks about the people of Habasha. Then he goes and he talks about the people from a land known as Zabij. And then thirdly, he talks about the Zanj. And so when he speaks about the Zanj, he describes them as individuals who were bare naked. They had no clothing. They wore no clothing. They were naked. They were cannibals. They were warlike people, very aggressive people, very somewhat, we would call savages in that sense. When you go up further north to the Zabish people, they're described as being half naked, right? And what's interesting with regard to the Zabish people, he says that there are some Muslims who live among them, right? But the Zanj people, there are no Muslims who live among them, right? But the Zabish, there are some Muslims who live among them. The Zabish are half-naked people. Then he talks about the Habasha, those who we typically refer to as the Abyssinians or the Ethiopians. And he says that these people, he had all very nice things to say about them. Right? Talk about they're very attractive, they're peace-loving people. He didn't talk about them not having clothing at all. And he says, and there are they have relationships with Muslims from this country and that country and that country, right? As if to suggest that as more Muslims interacted with the people, the more civilized they became, right? The more civilized they became. And this conforms to an ancient sort of pseudoscience or a theory related to climatic theory, which is connected to the idea that the center or the center of all human civilization is in the Mediterranean, right? And so the further away you get away from the Mediterranean, the less civilized you become. The closer you are to the Mediterranean, the more civilized you are, right? So Ibn Khaldun, for instance, many of the same things he said about those at the extreme south, he said about those of the extreme north, like the Slavs, the Slavic people, the Saqaliba, he spoke negatively of them in the same way he spoke about those at the extreme south, near the equator, or closer to the equator. And so, at any rate, so fundamentally, I wanted to know if there was a way to properly contextualize such statements, right? Was he talking about all Black people or just a particular type of Black people, right? And were these statements necessarily racist or just simply descriptive, right? So those are important questions that led me into that particular study. Among other things, of course, I talk about matters of course, the ideas of the concept of Blackness in the Arab literature and the Muslim Quran and the Sunnah, whether or not it is racism as part of the Islamic legacy, etc. So there are multiple things I deal with in the book. So that's really what my book is related to.
Okay, so if I could ask, and I'll join into the pin here, or the spotlight. Did you find it tended to be more descriptive or more racist? Because when you say it about that theory, we do know that Sham ibn Nuh and the Nubuwah settled in Syria. And that therefore there was no Nubuwah or lesser Nubuwah all the way up north. where there was another Iraqi traveler from the Abbasid times who has a book about having been sent far up north into Scandinavia and describes them as a wild people that grab women however they want to. They have slaves. They can grab their women in front of other men, that they don't bathe, that their king is just the one with the biggest strike, right? The one who strikes the hardest, he becomes the king, and that they don't read. And he went on with all sorts of, commentary that, that was bad, right? But it was clearly sort of just describing that's what they were like.
Right.
That's the first time I've heard this idea of the Mediterranean being the center, but it does sort of fit into that theory.
Yes.
That if civilization and Nubuwah are in one, or connected, cleanliness, reading, discriminating what you eat, right? Having marriage laws, laws related to sexuality. It sort of does make sense, right? So, what did you find that to be descriptive, and do you think that element of Nubuwah fits in that theory?
Yeah, I think that, of course, none of us could ever really know if the comments about those different people did not include some hyperbole, right? Or a certain racial animus against them, right? But what I do think is important, even if we were to say that it was animated by disdain, right, towards the people, is that disdain in most of our history has been a two-way street, right? Because, for instance, there's a tendency for us to focus on, like, okay, who among the Sahaba were Black, right? And that's, and it's an important thing to study, right? Who were Black, right? Or to say those had Black skin, or those who actually were African, those are actually not indigenous to Arabia, right? Bilal, his family, his roots, of course, we know, go back to East Africa, right? But Bilal was born and raised in Arabia, right? So by all, intents and purposes, Bilal ibn Rabah was culturally an Arab, right? But it's just he wasn't accepted as an Arab because his father was not an Arab. If his father had been an Arab, like, the father of Ammar ibn Yasir, for instance, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, then he probably would have gotten a different type of treatment, right? But we see even what happened with Ammar because of tribalism, right? Ammar's people were from Yemen, right? But they're now in the north and they don't have the protection of their tribe, right? So when they become Muslims, they're persecuted against because of that, right? And not because of their Black skin, right? It's because of them not having the protection, and them now they're going against the grain, right, of society, right? Whereas Abu Bakr had the protection of his tribe. The Prophet ﷺ had the protection of his tribe, right? But many people didn't have the protection of their tribes. Khabbab ibn Arad, by all intents and purposes, was a pure Arab, if you can talk about purity of race, but he still was persecuted. He was persecuted, and he actually has quotes saying that his persecution was even worse than Bilal. He said, at least Bilal had family who can console him and come to his support, but I didn't have anybody, right? I didn't have anybody, right? So I think that there's good reason to take them at their word, to say, okay, they're describing what they're seeing, right? And disdain was natural. Xenophobia is a universal thing, right? You can find the Africans saying negative things about the Arabs and vice versa, right? The fact that there were many Blacks in Arabia, some of that had to do with the fact that the army of Abraha didn't succeed, right? When they went to destroy the Kaaba, right? So what happens? Survivors, they become slaves, right? And so you would think that naturally, it would only be natural that an Arab would have a certain type of disdain towards an Ethiopian, because they were living under their terror. They were being terrorized by them, So now I say, okay, it's our turn. We're going to get back. We're taking revenge, sweet revenge, right? But to say that it's only because of Blackness or the color of their skin itself, I think is a bit intellectually lazy, especially taking into consideration that when we look at the many different the reports by lexicographers, anthropologists, and many of our religious scholars, like Imam Nawawi and others who have commented about this, And they said that the Arabs, the vast majority of the Arabs were light brown and dark brown. Right? That this is how they described them. Imam Nawawi himself, he was, was from the north, right? From Sham, in the area of Sham, and he himself, he still acknowledged that, we can assume that perhaps Imam Nawawi was a white man, or we would say what the Arabs would consider to be white, right? So, but he's still being honest, yes, that most of them are brown, dark, white, light, and dark brown. So why would the Arabs discriminate against the Abyssinians simply because of color, right? Mm-hmm. Especially taking into consideration when we look at the description of Bilal, and actually descriptions, we think of like, you compare the Bilal's description to the description of Zayd ibn Haritha, and you talk about just the nose of Bilal, right? And it sounds like Bilal had an Arab nose, what we typically would call an Arab nose, and Zayd ibn Haritha had an African nose, right? Right? It was sort of flat nose. Bilal's nose was like a hook nose, right? It was described in that fashion, right? So, again, I think that, and it's nice that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned something about the pen earlier today, and I was thinking about at the very beginning, before starting to get into all these details, I was going to make mention of the fact that in one hadith, and actually multiple narrations of the hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ, that he predicted among the signs of the hour is dhuhur al-qalam, right? Is the sort of the prevalence, or fushu al-qalam, right? In one narration, the prevalence or the widespreadness of the pen, which could mean, it can be connected to the issue of the printing press. It can mean mass literacy, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, not every sign of the hour is necessarily a negative thing, but they do become signs listed as signs of the hour. And I think I could say, or we could say that that when we reflect upon the very fact that that most, let's say you focus on America, if you look at statistics, statistically, the average American doesn't really read that much, right? And I think that, our schooling doesn't prepare us to actually live in a free society anymore. People are not critical enough. That most people, especially when you think of social media and the big tech companies, that our perception of reality has been distorted, right? By that, Facebook, for instance, can decide what particular news companies can actually get more sort of airplay or coverage, right, than others. And actually, statistically, said about 50% of Facebook users get most of their news from Facebook, right? So think about that. Is as Facebook decides, that this particular news company can actually share news and this one cannot, and what happens is that in itself can distort what is actually real, right? And then people not asking the right questions about so many different things, makes us vulnerable to manipulation, to brainwashing, right? You see, and I know that, like, for myself, that I have a hard time with a lot of people because of my attempts to try to raise awareness to this, which, unfortunately or fortunately, I can only do often because there are alternate perspectives on the right, and where I'll say, well, they're the only ones saying these things, so I have to share things from the right. And even though many Muslims have negative opinions of the right, they're not interested in watching or listening to those different things, But I'm saying, okay, well, listen, you're getting one particular narrative, one particular perspective, and I'm sharing with you another perspective, right? But look at the facts, follow, the evidence, right? And if you follow the evidence, then you'll see who's telling the truth and who's actually lying, at the end of the day. So.
And I found that it's so important, the point that you mentioned, that whenever there's a dislike or a conflict or something between two sides, it's sort of lazy to reduce it to one factor. Even, I would say, as a best example, Iman and Kufr. Okay?
Yeah.
Iman and Kufr. So many times in Islamic history, a corrupt Khalifa, he will suddenly become so upset about Kufr against the country and he will raise the all the fervor of Islam and jihad and tawheed. But lo and behold, that's the country that is taxing them on the road. That's the country that has the resources, right? So Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, why was he so interested to go open up Sindh and open up go into that silk route? I think it was Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, right? And he sent, a young Qurayshi. All of the Indians know his name, of course. His name is skipping my mind, but the Indians know him as the one who brought Islam to Sindh, Pakistan, India, which, of course, obviously now it's called Pakistan, but in that era, that was the area of Sindh. But if you notice, why did they choose that area to pick the fight with those pagans? Are there other non-believers? It's because there are multiple factors, right? And sometimes you have great trade relations with a country that's non-believers, all of a sudden they're okay. And then you have bad trade relations with non-believers, and all of a sudden their shirk is a problem now. So if we can understand that on the most important issue, which is Tawheed, then most likely we have it's the same thing where anytime there's a conflict, race the color of skin may be part of it, but there's probably something else going on there. And that it never really crossed my mind until you said it, that the Ethiopians had been keeping the Arabs under their thumb for so long. And that's why now you find so much disdain for the Ethiopian, right? So that actually makes so much sense. Denzel, it reminded me of something that Denzel Washington said. He said, it's not always about color of skin, it's about culture. That I make certain jokes with my family about Sundays, for example, like their ritual, Sunday going to church and everything, in front of a white friend. Only my family understands that joke. My white friend won't understand it. We're not leaving him out because he's white. We have a different culture.
Exactly.
Right? Like, even though we're all American, but to a degree, he doesn't share our culture 100%, and he won't understand all of our jokes. He won't eat all our food. And he made that point. I thought that was a great point for him to make. And I think that, which leads me to my main question, and also want to tell everybody who is on the chat that on YouTube, feel free to put your questions in and your comments to Sheikh Abdullah. But I'll start with my own question, which is that we see a lot in the discourse on race, and we care about these things because we have relationships in the MBIC, friendship relationships, family relationships with African Americans, marital relationships exist in MBIC. And anytime that someone says that, this, that, or the other, I consider it racist and I don't like it and it bothers me, we consider that to be like the Prophet ﷺ, who said, the Muslim is one body. If one part of him complains, the rest of the body responds. So we take it from a religious basis to listen to that negative reinforcement, that I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this. So I want to ask, and I'm sort of looking for more of the positive reinforcement. So, okay, we know what's bad, just like we know that idols are bad. In the Shahada, La ilaha, negation, illallah, affirmation. Negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement. La tushriku, don't have a false god. Ask me, I'm the one God. Okay, but worship me. So there's negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement. I respect and I'm glad that the negative reinforcement is being brought to the surface, because we have to be aware of that. And I'm digging a little bit for some of the positive reinforcement. So what's a good example? What's a good example of someone who is, what is the opposite? So we know what the negativity of racism and being racist. What is even the word for the opposite? Tolerant, good, peaceful. Like, what's the word for I don't even know what the word is for the opposite of it. What's the positive? And then what are the attributes? What are the things that they do? Like, if you see where I'm going. So I'm looking for where is the positive?
Right. Well, I think, again, the issue of words. I mean, the closest word that we have to race in the Arabic language is an-nasab, which just simply means blood tie, right? Your lineage, your blood tie. And for the Arabs, the nasab was paternalistic, right? Meaning that what really mattered was who your father was, right? Yeah, so Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, he says that authentic Arabness is determined by either one, you being born in Arabia, right? Two, well, not either, but born in Arabia. Two, having Arab parents, with specifically a father, right? And then thirdly, speaking the Arabic language. Now, race in the pre-modern period was culturally based. It wasn't based upon the ideas of biology, the concept of biology, or as we have it today. People think that sort of these are biological, homogeneity between people, right? And Ibn Khaldun, in his Muqaddimah, he actually says about nasab, he says, "An-nasabu amrun wahmiyun la haqiqata lahu." He said, race or blood tie or lineage, however you choose to translate it, is an illusory matter. It's imaginary, right? It has no reality, right? And the reason he said that was because in the past, if you wanted to become a member of a particular group, all you need to do is just appear out of nowhere and say, "Hey, I'm new in town. I've come from far away. Can I become part of your group?" And then if they include you, you become part of the group. And then they embrace you, right? As somewhat authentic, a member of that group, right? So issues of about like, okay, you actually might call it positive reinforcement. I think even before we start talking about positive reinforcement, I do think we have to be certain that we are in agreement that what is being alleged actually is what's happening, right? And I think that this is what is a big problem. And a larger times it's a big problem because of the way that we see race and we define it, and the way that people interpret other people's actions towards them. Like for instance, in the critical race theories, they have this idea called of sort of microaggressions. You might say something like, if you ask me, "Oh, brother, mashallah, how long you been Muslim?" Right? Well, why you consume? I'm a convert. It's like this microaggression, right? And if you commit a microaggression, it's a proof that you're racist. No, it's not necessarily a proof that I'm racist. It's just that it's a logical thing to ask. I haven't met many people like you, and most of the people I know like you, they converted to Islam, right? So that, I think that's really the first thing. So a lot of times our negative statements, our negative ideas, they come from a place which is not grounded in reality, and it's grounded in subjective sort of, ideas and sense of what's exactly occurring in the situation. But we do, of course, in our tradition, we do have in our tradition the very fight to overcome these type of issues. So one thing that was revolutionary, among other issues that are revolutionary about the Prophet ﷺ and his mission, is that he actually altered the way that the Arabs extended value to people, right? Because in the previous, prior to him coming, it was like, listen, all about who's my daddy, right? You know who my daddy is, but my daddy is so-and-so. Who's your daddy, right? It was a lot about that, right? Rasulullah ﷺ came, right? And he talked about, it's about Iman. He revolutionized that community. This is about Iman. Inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. That the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the one who is most pious, right? So he revolutionized that. Innamal mu'minuna ikhwa, right? So the Prophet, he did that to people, and so they started to evaluate one another in different ways altogether, right? And that is what true Islam is all about. It's about judging people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And so we do have our legacy. We have the legacy of the Prophet. We have the legacy of Sahaba. Even Bilal, he struggled at times. But Bilal also, there was Sahaba. Abdullah bin Auf, he married his sister to Bilal, right? He was married to one of his sisters. As a matter of fact, two of his wives were Arab women, right? Well, actually, three. He had three wives, all three Arab women. One of them was the sister of Abdullah bin Auf, radiallahu anhu, right? You have these different cases like this, but you also have stories of them belittling the value of different people, right? Now, was it only because of their blackness, or simply because a difference in culture or different or place where they originated regionally? that's a different story altogether. But again, like with you, I agree that we have to stop. We have to get over this idea that you can explain everything as having a single causal sort of factor, right? There's this sort of one factorism called causality. Is that, you see a black person is killed by a police officer. The first thing we want to look at, we want to know, was he white? Was the police officer white? Okay, if he was white, automatically we know exactly why he did it, right? I said, well, no, that's not the way it works. That's not the way it's supposed to work, right? See, but this is where we've been pushed, right? And so if I say that, I get called Uncle Tom, I get called like a sellout. I say, well, whatever, I don't care. I've already chosen what I'm willing to die upon, and I'm going to die upon Islam. That's Islam to me, right? So you can call me whoever you want, but the judge, my judge is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And if you can't show me anything in the Quran and Sunnah that would justify you thinking that way, right? Mm-hmm. So it's again, I'm sorry I didn't really, like I said, I didn't really directly answer your question, but I do think that these other ideas are also important to reflect upon as we continue to try to understand our reality and then try to heal our community as well. But I don't think that you do us, meaning Black people, a favor, or you do us justice by allowing us to continue to commit wrong think, right? I don't think that you do us any justice by doing that. That we are cooperate upon righteousness and God consciousness. Do not allow the hatred of a people lead you into injustice. That is the Quran. That is the Quran. So we don't prejudge people, right? And we don't sweep everybody or judge them with a broad brush and say everybody, all of them are like this, all of them behave this, all of them think this way, all of them are just automatically default racists and they can't do anything for it to redeem themselves, right? But this is what we're being fed right now, and it's destroying lives, it's destroying relationships, and we have to find a way to remind our fellow brothers and sisters of the criteria and principles we've been given by our Prophet and by our Creator, and for us to overcome polarization. Tahadu tahabu. The Prophet talks about that. Spread, exchange gifts, exchange love. Right. We want to make people. We want people to love us. We want to be loved. We want others. We want to love other people as well. What we should be trying to endear people to ourselves, but it shouldn't be this idea that you're not down with me and you're not following us, therefore you must be racist. You wanted them. You're either. There's no way. Because they said you're either anti-racist or you are. You're anti-racist, you're racist or you're anti-racist, right? There's no in between, and being anti-racist means that you have to come out and acknowledge your privilege, et cetera, and saying that, that all your people are the same, right? And says, well, no, Ibrahim Eskindi, he's not my imam, he's not, whatever, he's not a wali, but you have a lot of Muslims who are following those ideas, and it's really creating much more polarization than there needs to be.
And there's a element in Islam that we know that sometimes, as the Prophet ﷺ said, if we leave guidance, we collapse into argumentation. The Prophet ﷺ has this famous hadith. And in that argumentation, you find nitpicking for the flaw of somebody to render him misguided. And we know that happened in the Salafi movement. It probably has happened in every movement to a degree. It has happened in the South Asian community. They have their own debates where they have two madhabs or two groups, not madhabs, but groups of Hanafis. 90% of their theology and law is the same, but has descended into, all right, you said this, you agreed with that, right? And subhanAllah, I found so many similarities to the current culture now, because we have things in the past where if you have quoted a scholar, you quoted him, you didn't put him outside the fold of the Sunnah, you also are mubtada, chain tabdiya, chain innovation. All right. You did not say that so-and-so is an innovator. Therefore, you're an innovator.
Right. Right.
I'm starting the same thing here. It's like a gotcha culture. It's like
Yeah.
almost waiting for the first slip up. Gotcha. Right. And you're canceled and you're out and you're destroyed. It's such it's so similar, and it's never a good thing. It's a sign of descent, not elevation.
Yeah. Right.
Elevation, I think you're going to have husna dhan, right? Which is having a good opinion of people, even their slip-ups, right? And this idea that somebody is 60, 70 years old and they lived their life and they found for 50 years the life was the same. Only in the past 20 years things change really quickly. You can't expect that man is gonna he's gonna have reference points, right? He's gonna have reference points from the past and he's gonna apply it. Just like you said, someone comes up to you and says, assumes you're a convert, right? It's because in his reference point, he's not caught up to date that there's second generation Muslims now, right? And third generations now too. So we did have a question. This question is from Massachusetts. It says they were unable to, I don't know, maybe they're having trouble. The chat should be live for everybody. But this question says, you brought up Shem ibn Nuh in Syria. I wanted to ask about Ham ibn Nuh. And did he settle in Africa / North Africa? Especially with the mention that the closeness to the Mediterranean was a sign of civilization. Okay. So he's saying, my husband is saying that the Berbers in North Africa hold themselves to be descendants of Ham ibn Nuh, and their language is an evidence of that. So if you have do you have any commentary on what do we say in Islam about Ham ibn Nuh?
Well, I mean, the issue of this early history, there's not really much reliable information we have about, those early people, to be totally honest. But there is an important doctrine that was operative during the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade with Europeans, called the Curse of Ham. And fundamentally, this is a story that in the sort of extra biblical commentaries that spoke about this idea that that Nuh alayhi salam had three sons. One was Shem and Ham and Japheth. And one day Nuh alayhi salam, wal-iyadhu billah, supposedly he got drunk and he fell asleep afterwards and he was naked. And so Ham, he came upon him first, saw him and looked at his shame. It didn't cover his shame, but he laughed at him. And then when the other two sons had come, they noticed that their father was uncovered, and then they came to cover him up. And after this, when he came back to sobriety, he heard what was told to him, and he declared a curse upon the children of Ham to be the slaves of their brothers through Canaan, until Yom Qiyamah. Right. And so, of course, this is a theory, a story which Muslims were familiar with this. Early Muslims were familiar with the story as well. But the Christians, many of them during the transatlantic slave trade, utilized this as justification for enslaving blacks, saying that blacks are the direct descendants of Ham. And since because of the curse, God actually looks upon this in a very positive light, that they're supposed to be our slaves. Imam al-Tabari actually endorses this doctrine in his tafsir, but later scholars did not, like Abdurrahman ibn Jawzi, Suyuti, Ibn Khaldun, and so all of them, they did not. They said that this is the doctrine. There's no basis for this. Ibn Khaldun goes further to even saying that there's no basis for the belief that the descendants of Ham were even black, right? So that's what I can say about that. But outside of what we do know about how the theory has been utilized, there is really not a whole lot of reliable information with regard to that early history that we can actually make reference to. The Quran doesn't make any mention of, other than the one son of Nuh alayhi salam who actually died in the flood. Outside of that, there's no mention of it. Any mention of any other sons of Noor are mentioned in the Hadith, Israeliyats, among other things. So that's really the extent that we know from the Islamic sources realistically.
So there's no prophetic narration about Ham settling in the south, Japheth in the north, and Shem in the middle.
Not that I personally recall, but I've delved into this issue. I have, looked in stuff like Tabaqat ibn Sa'd and other books to see, and there are narrations definitely that actually would say things like, okay, that Ham, his children were this color, Japheth, his children were that color, Sham, his children are this color, or these people, where they come from Sham, these people come from those people. But there are contradictions between those narrations. It's very difficult to reconcile because some of the narrations give the impression that some of the people belong to the black population, and then others give the impression they belong to the white population. So it's they're not reliable for Aqidah. Right? They're not things that we can use as the basis for our belief system. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question that's come in here, saying that there's some sort of theory going on being passed, and I don't know exactly where they're basing it from, but that Islam upholds that the Imam Mahdi will be black, and that there will be a leadership in the end of time of the Muslims will be black. Have you come across any such theory or utilization of certain verses to that? That was the question. That it's the first time I'm hearing it, but I'm just transmitting the question.
Well, it's the same. First time I'm hearing it as well. I would think that it would be uncharacteristic of the predecessors to make such a suggestion or such an assertion, or to emphasize it to the extent that it becomes like the basis of some type of triumphalism, right? Instead of racial triumphalism. Now, of course, Sahaba did describe one another and reported them in a different group, different hadith. They talk about, of course, Hassan and Hussein, and sometimes you find different descriptions of them. But the idea that the Ummah is going to be black, I've never come across anything like that. I'm not saying that I haven't read everything, but I would imagine that you're talking about apocryphal information, right? That never made it to orthodoxy throughout Islamic history, if they do exist. But you find a lot of crazy things in the hadith literature. You find just very weird things, but just because it's there doesn't make it true. As we know, ulama were they're very meticulous about trying to highlight what was fabricated from those that were not fabricated. And there was no good reason to think that the ulama were going to hide something from the ummah simply because of the color of the people being described in the hadith. So in this case, we don't know of this. We never heard of it before. So I had to assume that either it doesn't exist or it doesn't represent any orthodox teaching of Islam.
Okay, good. And the last question now, it's 6 o'clock Pacific time, and it's about the time for Salat al-Maghrib for you. So we were going to let you go with one more question, and that is, Sayyidina Luqman al-Hakim, is it ascertained that he was from al-Habasha, that he was from the civilizations of Ethiopia, making him someone who would, be an African representative in the Quran?
Well, the narrations I know about Luqman al-Hakim say he was Nubian, not that he was Abyssinian. There may be one hadith, but most of the narrations I know say that he was Nubian, and it said that he was a Nubian slave. Now, most of the ulama of the view that Luqman al-Hakim was not a prophet, but there's a minority view that said that he was. I think there's good reason to believe that he was a prophet, personally. And I don't think that in itself undermines anybody's iman to say that he was a prophet. But those who have the view that it's impossible for a prophet to be a slave, as we find certain Asha'ira scholars, like, for instance, Sheikh Ahmed Sawi, rahmatullahi alayhi, the Egyptian scholar from 19th century, his view was that slaves can't be prophets. And so he actually, in his sharh of the Jawhara Tawheed, and he's speaking about this issue, he says that Luqman al-Hakim was not a prophet, but even if we were to assume it to be true that he was a slave and a prophet, then what it meant was that he had brown skin that resembled that of the slaves, which really tells you that certain sort of mindset that the Sheikh unfortunately had about slavery, right? And it's coming up. You're talking. This is the Enlightenment era. So perhaps he was influenced by the Enlightenment thinkers and the new trend of focusing only on blacks as slaves. But he sort of projects this all the way to the past. But for me, I believe that yes, it's possible for a person to be a prophet and a slave. Because Yusuf alayhi salam, we don't have any problem saying that Yusuf alayhi salam was a prophet and he was a slave at one time, right?
True.
Right. So why can't Luqman al-Hakim also be a slave? I mean, be a prophet who happened to be a slave at one time in his life. So usually we say that he's al-Hakim, Luqman al-Hakim. But basically, with respect to the question, most of the narrations I'm familiar with, they say that he was Nubian. Which of course is East African as well, rather than him being from Habesha.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We took up a nice hour and some of your time, and Sheikh Abdullah comes by to MBSC online, alhamdulillah, like once or twice a year, and Ramadan is coming, and inshallah we'd like to have you again as usual in one of our Ramadan evenings. So we're lucky to have a good friend in Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, who is now, congratulations, and I think like 1 year ago you got your PhD, right, or so?
I bet 2016.
Oh, way back then. Okay, so you hadn't been using Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, but for some reason I thought it was something recent. But alhamdulillah. Well, congratulations, and we're looking forward for the book to come out, the thesis to come out in the form of.
It actually is out. But right now you can only purchase it from the publisher, the UK, Claritas.
Oh, okay.
Claritas Books. We were stockpiling some of them through Lamppost, edu.org. But we ran out of our copies. We have to get more copies, to make it easier for people in the US. But like right now, if you wanted to purchase a copy, you have to go through Claritas Books website in the UK. And if you wanted a Kindle version of it, then you can get one from Amazon as well. Yeah.
And when's the new book coming out?
So this is already out. The book actually came out last year. Was it last year?
The new one?
Yeah. This is the Negro Arab.
Okay. And that's on Lamppost too.
Right. We have it posted there, but you can go to Claritas. It's CLARITS, Claritas Books.
Okay, great.
Connected with Awakening, which who actually publish Maher Zain. It's their publishing house, same publishing house that actually does his music.
Oh, nice.
Just go under a different name, Claritas Books. And so I actually published 3 books with them. One of them is the Negro and Arab Muslim Consciousness. Another one was the Ibn Taymiyyah's Raf al-Malam al-Immat Alam, Ibn Taymiyyah's Defense of the 4 Imams. And also an excerpt from Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali's Lata'if al-Ma'arif, the chapter Khitam al-Am, which relates to death. So it's called In Remembrance of Death. So you can find all 3 of those on Amazon, or you can go to their website, claritasbooks.com. So yeah, it's out
there. Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. Well, congratulations on those, on the publications, and on the even though the other one I thought is still upcoming, but inshallah I look forward to get my hands on it.
Copy.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan to our dear friend Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, and inshallah we will see you bi'idhnillah ta'ala maybe in about 50-60 days in the month of Ramadan bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. And thank you everyone on Family Night tonight for joining in. Thank you for your comments and the messages that you sent me all here. Next week will be Youth Night. So 7 o'clock we'll be on for the dhikr, and then 8 o'clock Youth Night. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على رسول الله. افرحي يا طيبة أنت دار نبينا، لو يفيض الشوق إليك من يداوينا، دعوناك يا مجيب أن نلقى الحبيب يا نبي مهما تغيب، أنت في القلب يقينا. والحمد لله والشكر لله، الحمد لله والشكر لله. أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على رسول الله، أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على رسول الله. قد جاء المختار ختاما نورا وهدى، فهدى للإسلام عبادا بكتاب الله. قد جاء المختار ختاما نورا وهدى، فهدى للإسلام عبادا بكتاب الله. طبت يا بدر التمام يا نبي سلام، أنت يا خير الأنام، نجمنا في ليالينا. والشكر لله، الحمد لله والشكر لله. أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على رسول الله، أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على رسول الله. الحمد لله، الحمد لله، الحمد لله، الحمد لله والشكر لله. أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على رسول الله، أزكى صلاتي وسلامي على